Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Castelline Ministries podcast, where I aim to help Christians better understand their Bible with instructional strategies I've learned in my almost 10 years in education. My name is Jared Castelline, and thanks for choosing to listen to this podcast. In this podcast, we dive into different Bible studies that I've put together. In this first series, we'll be going through the book of Mark. I'd love to encourage you to join me on the study. You'll find a link in the description to the weekly study guide sheets, or you can find those on our website as well. For each series that I go through, I will have a guest with me. And for this series, I'm happy to have with me Kaylee. Kaylee, how are you? Sorry, I had to read it this time because that's our first episode, so I don't know what I'm saying yet. How are you?
Good. Good. How are you doing?
I'm excellent. Tell us a bit about yourself and so people know who they'll be working with over the next 8 weeks.
Yeah. Oh, hi. I'm Kaylee. I am Jared's sister, so a part of the Castelline family at one point, but I'm now married to my lovely husband, Mason. We are located in Dallas, Texas, and we have a little 1-year-old boy, Micah, who is just a joy. So
she forgot to mention I was her favorite brother, but that's okay. Yeah, we got just because most people joining, if this is your first episode, you might not know about me. I've got 2 kiddos, 2 girls, and a cat. She's making a scene there. So yeah, we're both. What I wanted to bring to this podcast was just ordinary Christians. Like, do you have any seminary experience, Kaylee? Do you work at the church? Are you employed by churches?
Nope. I
Nope.
work for a Christian nonprofit, but that is not the same.
Yep. So we are just both normal Christians. We have kids, and we just want to kind of demonstrate like these are doable for anybody, but you get a lot out of it. And so that's kind of how I've put these studies together, hopefully, so you feel encouraged. You don't have to be special and have all this background. Everything's approachable, and I think that'll come through. Just because this is the first episode, I got a special question for us here before we dive into the book of Mark. So, Kaylee, when I say Bible study, and I actually encourage any of you listeners, write down your answer to this as well. When I say the word Bible study, what did that mean to you growing up? And what does that mean to you now?
That's a good question. Growing up, I probably would have considered Bible study more of, a group of people getting together to study something about God, like a Bible study group or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I think of Bible study, I think of, probably more what the words actually say, a study of the Bible. Like digging deep into the scripture and understanding the meaning of the text and the context and,
yeah,
what do words mean and things like that.
There is a cultural acceptance of the term Bible study that doesn't necessarily mean that we will be studying the Bible. It's just like people group together, and the Bible's part of it, and verses are brought in. But what we do on this podcast is we're studying the Bible, just how you said in that second example. I remember growing up, my first exposure to Bible study, they hosted them midweek, and you show up and they're like, all right, we're going to take 20 minutes. Just go find a spot. We'll play some soft music, pray, read the Bible. And then you were supposed to come back to a group discussion. It's like, we're reading Hebrews and I'm in high school. Like, I don't know what any of this means. Like, this phrase stood out to me, but it's like, I don't think that was doing a deep job. It was kind of just like what thoughts popped in my head. And so what I've put together is hopefully a way that we can read the Bible and appreciate how it connects to other areas of the Bible, see the big picture, and then encourage everybody to go to other resources that can give you all the background information that you need. Okay. All right. So this first series, we are going through the book of Mark. And as I said at the intro, we would love for you guys to join us in this series. Going through Mark is an 8-week series. This is our intro week. And then we'll probably do a Q&A at the end, have you guys submitting questions all throughout, and kind of we'll have a Q&A episode as well. So a total of 10 weeks going through this. You can find in the description, whether it's the video or podcast, um, the link to the study guide sheets. They look like this. I'll pull it up as well. We'll be talking about that in a little bit, and I'll explain how to use that. And there's also some other resources there as well. But to get started, I wanted Kaylee and anybody listening, what do you already know coming into the book of Mark? So, what does you already know from church or from your own studies? Uh, in my imagination, most people just kind of know, well, it's one of the gospels and there's some stories. They don't know too much, but what do you know, Kaylee? And we'll see.
Yeah, that seems like such a broad question, but
Mm.
to start off, yeah, it's one of the four gospels. I've done a little bit of study on kind of the origin of some of the books of the Bible, how we know they can be true. So I'm pretty sure some of like, I don't know, the rules or when they're deciding like what books were in the Bible,
Mhm.
um, had to be from, first accounts, witnesses. So it was written by Mark, who I believe was getting his information from Peter, if I remember right. Um, so Peter was obviously the first account witness of this, and Mark was kind of writing all these stories down of Jesus, and um, because of that, it's written somewhere before 100 AD, so pretty close to right after the time of Christ. Um, yeah, I I don't really know if I could say much outside of
Okay.
that just from my own personal study, but yeah, that
So
was
that's
one of the
sort of
questions.
the outside of Mark stuff. Do you
Mhm.
know anything like internal to the actual text of Mark? And you don't
Like
have
I
to
know
have
that,
anything.
yeah, I don't know the best way to answer that.
Oh, how
Just
about
from,
let's go with this. What sets Mark as different to the other gospels? Do you, or you have any ideas for that?
I feel like I've heard something at some point, that some of the gospels kind of use each other as
Hmm.
references, and I think
Hmm.
Mark is one that is one of the earliest gospels, and most of them use it as some of their source references. Is that what you're talking? I think that's kind of how
Well,
they
hey, I dug
explained it
more
to me, but
information out of you. And
yeah.
you are correct, although scholars will debate, but that's the consensus view, or majority view, is that Mark came first. You kind of put it's the writing within the first 100 AD. Um, the, even the most skeptical scholar can't push past 70 AD because there's no awareness in Mark about the destruction of the temple. So 70 would be the latest Mark could be written. Most people put it early 60s, maybe into the 50s. Um, and most do agree that Matthew and Luke are pulling from it. Some people would argue differently, and it's not a big deal either way. But that's one of the reasons why I picked Mark is like, hey, this is one of the first ones written, and so I think it's good to go with that. And as you'll find out in the study, I don't have us go over to read any of the other gospel stories, even though they share, because I don't find that incredibly helpful because each author is developing their own themes. And when you start to merge all the ideas, the theme gets lost. It's kind of, have you ever done one of the merge gospels where they line them all up? And it's like, here's if you put them all, merge them all together, because most modern, especially Western Americans, we love the chronology. Give it to me in the order. I just want to know the order. And but that's not what they were interested in. They're working themes. So okay, I think you're right about where most normal Christians would be at. They have a bit of historical knowledge about it, know a bit of the stories. Like as we read through, you're like, yeah, I know these stories. Um, we're gonna come back to that same question at the end and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, let me tell you about Mark. And you're going to be like, I can tell you everything. You're going to tell me, I know what a Markin sandwich is. We'll get to that. Just um, so yes, the author is credited to Mark. It wasn't in the original script where it said, Mark, am writing this, but we do have, I believe his name was, I've got it here, Papias. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. Papias, that's what it is. He was in like the first or second century. And so he claims to have talked to what he referred to as the elder, which would be John, who confirmed that, yes, this is from Mark. It wasn't that important to the early Christians to have that written down because they were in the mindset of Jesus coming back. And so even the writings took some time to happen because they were just like, we're getting ready. And then as people started to die, it was like, oh, hey, start writing this down because we need this stuff. But very highly credible that it is Mark. Most people would agree that it's Mark. Mark crops up all over the New Testament. I think he's referenced about 10 times outside of the book of Mark. There's stories with him in Acts. He goes with Paul and Barnabas. There's a bit of conflict with Paul, and Paul actually kind of separates from Barnabas and Mark. He goes with Silas, I think. And there's a little account where later on, Paul's like, no, I don't want to go with Mark because he flaked on us last time. And so, like, there's this, like, ooh, that's some tension. Like, this guy wrote the gospel and Paul doesn't like him. But what's so cool is that later in Acts, Paul is like, send Mark to me. He's precious to me. And Mark ends up becoming this huge help for writing out his letters. And so he worked both with Paul, and then he's also mentioned in First Peter because he was a disciple directly with Peter. He was instrumental for writing things down for Peter, because Peter would have been able to write in like Aramaic, but not in Greek. And so Mark has that specialty to him. It's not 100% confirmed, but most people believe that Mark does make an appearance in his book, just not named. I'm not going to spoil that story because it's really fun, but when we get to it, I'll point that out. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I no, I don't,
Okay.
but it just makes me think of I think John's gospel, he constantly refers to himself as like the
The
disciple who
beloved.
Jesus, the beloved, or
Hmm.
yeah,
So that's not
like
just
this.
him being like, "Oh, he loved me most." It's a writing style of the time that if you're writing a narrative and you're part of the story, you don't you don't like advocate like that's me. You just kind of write it out and you try to be incognito. And so Mark does the same thing where we'll get there. It's at the end, but you just kind of read it. You're like, "What? Who's that? What?" And then it's like, oh, "That was Mark." And there's a lot of evidence for it too. So we'll get to it. Um, I think you were spot on. Let me see. Who is Mark? John Mark. He grew up in a wealthy home. His mother was Mary. The story in Acts where Peter miraculously gets out of prison and shows up at a house. That was John Mark's mom's house. Um, so he grew up in a wealthy home. So that's how he's really well at writing in Greek. He had a Greek education, and he has grew up Jewish, so he knows kind of the Semitic stuff. There's a lot of cool evidence that his Greek writing has that Hebrew and Semitic twinge to it. Where did he get his information from? You got that one right. You got it from Peter. Before we end today, I'm actually going to show you some in the book of Mark's clues that he tells you that it's Peter, which is really cool. Um, should we do that now? Yeah, because then I'm going to move on to the actual Bible study. Do you have your Bible with you? You
Yep.
would hope so. Go to Mark 1, and which Bible version do you have?
ESV.
ESV. Let's see what yours says. Go to 1 verse 16 and read out what yours says there.
Passing alongside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them,
You don't have to keep going.
okay,
So, if you have
it's there.
it's there. We're going to look at that. So, who does he name twice in that first verse?
Simon.
He names Simon, who is Peter. He names him
Mhm.
twice. And so that's kind of a context clue. You'll see this throughout the book of Mark. When he name drops somebody, he's putting their names because either this is who he got the information from, or this is someone within the Christian community you can go and verify this with. But a lot of the miracles, it's like he just healed the blind man and he doesn't get a name because like they're not around or something like that. So we'll look at a lot of those, but he names them twice at the beginning of Mark. And then if we jump to, I think, go to chapter 15. What I was going to say about the NIV, the original Greek has Peter, his name twice, Simon, and they shorten it and they're just like Peter and his brother. So they take out the double name, so it's harder to see that he's name dropping him twice.
Mhm.
So that may not sell everybody, but let's look at 15, and let's find it. Betrays, crucifixion, death of Jesus. Nope. So we're in okay. Chapter 16, go to verse 7. And you can just read the first little line.
But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee.
So go tell his disciples and Peter, who is a disciple.
Mm-hmm.
So why name drop Peter there? He's kind of putting as bookends. Peter's my main source for the majority of this work. And then the only times where he's not using Peter is in the crucifixion, burial, and resurrection, where he starts name dropping Mary, Martha, and all the women that were there because they were the only witnesses. So he puts their names just a ton of times so that it's clear this is my witness. But he kind of bookends both sides. Peter, in weird ways, that's using it twice. And then why would you name drop Peter when he's already the disciple? So that's in the context clues that Peter is his resource. Um, and then one little note on that: when he's going through the story, anytime that they're near Galilee, all the details about geography are very precise. Once they get out of Galilee and they're in Judea, it's very broad. Because if Peter was the one telling the story, he would know more about Galilee than he would down in Judea. So a lot of cool. You and I, if we sat down in the Bible studies I did growing up, if I just, oh, let's read Mark, I would never get that. But because I've listened to other scholars and people who have time to dig into these things, it's like, oh, wow, they brought all that information to me. Cool. Was that cool information or am I just a nerd?
No, that was cool information.
Okay.
I'm thinking for people who are wanting to come along with us in this study,
What do they
what
think?
are some good resources for them to
Yes.
have alongside with them
Okay.
so they can catch on to some of these things?
Cool. All right. My top resources. Anytime I start the book of the Bible, pull up Bible Project videos, and I do their book of the Bible.
Mhm.
I encourage anyone to do that for the book of Mark because it's going to frame the whole story, and you'll know which section in the story you're at.
Mhm.
I did that one last night just to prepare, make sure I refreshed everything. As I was writing this Bible study out, all my references that I was adding into it, I got from my Bible, but then I listened to Bible Thinker. He does great podcast series, and he did a book on Mark. And so I listened through with him, and that's where a lot of that historical and evidence in the text came from. Um,
I think I recommended him to you, so
you did,
I'd
you
like to take
recommended
credit to
both of
that.
those podcasts. If you need podcast recommendations, Kaylee's your person. She knows them all. So those are the two that I've been using for a lot of my Bible studies, and it brought me to a whole different level. It's no longer about what does Jared know, it's they actually had the time to go to the scholars, see what everybody's saying, and then here's the synthesis of all of that information for you in a podcast episode. So if you're going to go through this, I encourage do the Bible Project video at the start, maybe even at the end, just to see how much you have grown. And then if you want to, Bible Thinker, he's got a Mark series that you could do. And there's about 70 episodes. He goes verse by verse and it's pretty slow going. But if you got the time, that would bring your study of Mark to a whole different level. So,
Do you recommend like are study Bibles
mm,
helpful or are they those still kind of
I
challenging?
just I've got a new one this year, and it's not necessarily a study Bible, it's an apologetics Bible. So I
Mm.
did get a few bits of information where when critics come against the book of Mark, they actually put in an article that's like, so critics will say this, which, when they first said it, we are like, oh no, there's a problem. But then when you actually dig deeper, like, oh no, actually it actually supports this even better. And so I love having those in there. My other Bible had a lot of verse references, but anytime you've looked at those, it's like over referenced. You're like, I'm not going to go searching through all of those. So my Bible study, it's not that many. It's just the good ones. Like I've gone through and I've looked. And it's like, is this information we need to go back and read in the Old Testament? So that's kind of embedded in here. My suggestion is just not to stick for this one series is fine, but never stick with just one Bible translation type. Definitely have your one that's like, I'm familiar with this, so it's easier to study. But as I kind of mentioned with that Peter thing, Bibles do different things with words, and whether they're trying to translate it word for word, or if they're trying to do like a phrase for phrase, they're all different. And each one is better at different points. So just having a few available, or if you hit a weird passage where the wording's really weird, that's where it's great to pull up one of the websites that you can compare all the different translations, because there's probably something weird going on. So good question. Okay. Let's jump into actually how do we use this Bible study guide? And to do that, I'm going to share my screen. But for those of you that are doing this just audio, don't worry. You just need to go and pull up either through the website, or there'll be a link in the description, these study guides. And if you got that printed or you can see it, that's all that I'm going to be talking about. So you have access to it. So starting this week, each week we read 2 chapters of Mark, and that's clear there in the passages section. But you notice all the numbers and different things going on there. So I want to make sure that that was clear to everybody what is going on there. And then we'll do one as an example. That's my teacher side. We'll do an example. So it's like, yep, that makes sense. So we'll read Mark 1 and Mark 2. But within Mark 1, so you see how there's the little 2 in the front?
Mm-hmm.
That means in Mark 1, verse 2, he is referencing, or you want to go and read Isaiah 40. And then if I put a bold number at the end, that means within Isaiah 40, verse 3 is the key that he's highlighting. So let's actually look at Mark 1, verse 2. As it is written in Isaiah the prophet, see, I am sending my messenger ahead of you. He will prepare your way. So now you can see, okay, so if I want to know more about what he's referencing, I go and read all of Isaiah 40, because we want all the context there, because Mark is wanting you to have all the context. But I put verse 3 because that's the part that he's specifically referencing.
Mm.
So does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. And if it didn't make sense, I did put a little cheat sheet in the small group leader lesson plan, which everybody has access to because all my stuff is free, where I do little color code explanations. So if none of that made sense, it's there and available for everybody. I gave that to my small group, or some people in my small group, and it made sense after they read that. So hopefully that makes sense. So you're not just reading Marks 1 and 2, although I might suggest you start by just reading straight through Mark 1, Mark 2, so you have everything loaded. But then you may want to go through and read again some of these things that he's highlighting from the Old Testament, because the point of this series is Mark is not just a New Testament book. He's pulling from the Old Testament a lot, and going back and understanding all that information is going to bring out aspects that you never knew before. And then you'll also notice, so that's what you're reading for each week. Thing up at the top that I have is the questions. And I have questions at the top for a specific reason. Because as you read through and you're doing all your studying, you're going to have questions. So write them down. And there's 2 things that you can do with those questions. Like, Kaylee, you could come to the next episode and be like, hey, I have this question, and we can talk about it. Or if it's the middle of the week, you can spend time and start researching your question. And I have found that to be the best part of my Bible studies is I came up with this question, I Google it, other people had this question, and here's this great explanation, and it blows your mind. So that's kind of why I have that highlighted up at the top, because I think that's going to be a huge part of people's Bible studying is digging deeper to go find somebody who has the answers to that. You'll end up finding resources that you use a lot. So when I was doing this study and or previous studies and I had questions, got questions was something that popped up a ton, and they have great answers to a lot of things.
Mhm.
So you'll be like, that's my trusted website right there. I'm going there. Um, so that's how I would use that. The look forwards, this is actually the only series I've ever done where I put like my own personal information on there, like, hey, focus on this stuff while you read. But for each week, I kind of put a few things for you to keep an eye out for. Um, Hopefully it's helpful. We'll find out. Down towards the bottom, you've got key verses. Again, that's just my opinion. You could totally disagree with me, but um, a big section for notes. I tend to end up also taking notes on the back. That's totally fine. And then lastly is application. I'm not saying you have to always have an application, but just sometimes, hey, I'm reading the Bible. What am I doing to change my life because of the Bible? That's how I would think about it. So, do you have questions, thoughts on the study guide? Do you think you and our listeners will be good with using it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna come to you with my questions, and so you better be ready.
Another great idea. Um, I've encouraged you to try to get your husband Mason on doing the study as well, so that way you have a thought partner during the week until we do our podcast episode. I'm gonna try to get my wife going on the study with me as well. She's a pre-K teacher, so nights are always busy prepping for crafts, but we'll see. I might convince her. But having somebody there who you can bounce ideas off of would be super helpful. And I know not everybody
Mhm.
listening has that, which is why we're doing this. So that way, we'll discuss some of the things that you guys have. And I will be creating a form for you guys if you want to submit questions. Then at the end, we'll do a Q&A. So that should be in the description. I haven't created it yet, but in the future I will. So there you go.
Cool.
And the purpose of the study is to get through the book of Mark. So, but while also seeing the Old Testament. This has always been important to me recently because growing up, it was like Old and New Testament were these two separate things. And as I've been doing more studies, it's like, no, this is one full cohesive story. And they saw it that way. And so I want people to start to see it that way. So that's why if I'm doing something in the Old Testament, a series in the Old Testament, I'm pointing you forward to the New Testament to see how it all plays out. And in this case, we're looking back. I think I have a few New Testament references too, but it's mainly looking back. All right. Let's move into our closing. Kaylee, what are you
Well, I
hoping to
had a
get?
question
Oh,
first.
backing
As
up.
yeah, as we kind of start a book, sometimes I feel like when I start a book of the Bible, I'm just like, jumping in the
Uh
middle of a
huh.
story, and then like, hear people say it, oh, you need to know the context of who it's written to, or,
Mm-hmm.
themes. Like, what do you feel like is helpful for people as they get started in a new book of the Bible? What things should we learn before we jump in so that we're better prepared for what we're going to read?
Yeah. I would probably, for this case, just encourage most of your Bibles have a theme or an history or context section. Read that. And if your Bible doesn't have it, go ahead and try to find something online. I wouldn't try to spend too much time on this one study doing that. But as you continue to do more Bible studies like this, your questions drive you to research, which drive you to different podcasts. And now you're listening. And then you hit a guy who loves talking about the historical stuff. Like I listen to the 10-minute Bible hour, and he's a historian by trade. And so all the stuff from the Persian Empire all the way up to the Roman Empire, he always talks about. So now that's just in my head. But I can't tell you to go listen to 500 episodes to get all that, right? So it's just do a little bit so you have some sort of context, but then just make Bible studying a part of your life. And over time, you start to, it's no longer these ancient, weird, I kind of know some names, but like all these things are connecting. I kind of have like a storyline from the time of, Genesis, and I kind of know the flow all the way up to the books of the Bible. And so that's a thing that will take time. But definitely just read that little snippet before the book starts, and I think that's enough context to get going.
Okay.
Yeah. So what are you hoping to get out of this Bible study?
Well, I feel like I've been on a similar journey as you have. We grew up in the same home, so we have very similar life experiences from our
Mm-hmm.
past. And the last several years of my life, I've been in several communities that have really valued studying the Bible. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized, like, gosh, I've been a Christian my whole life, and like, I don't know if I can say I truly know how to like study the Bible deeply.
Yeah.
And so you've been fun to talk through over the years on what you've been doing. And so I'm mostly wanting to learn from you on some of these practices and on ways to pick things out of scripture that's not just okay, I read the Bible and I'm done for
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
day and moving on, but how do we really find the deep truths and
Mm-hmm.
knowledge that the Bible has to give us?
Yeah. Cool. I am looking to get things from other people. I'm really excited that one, I'm sharing this with you and we'll be able to bounce ideas, but also that we're sending this out, hopefully getting lots of people to view, and I get their thoughts, their questions, because I've gone through, I always go through my studies by myself once just to make sure they all make sense. So it's like, well, I kind of know what I know, and I might get more out of it this time. But one of the things about Christianity, it's not about just doing it on your own. This was meant to be done within community because we all bring in different perspectives and life experiences. So something I just read past, you're sitting there like, oh my gosh, that just hit my soul. And I'm like, whoa, tell me about it. This part that didn't mean anything to me before, now I has meaning for me. So
Hmm.
that's why I think it's important to not just do these studies on our own, but we're doing it with people. That's why I all my stuff is written for small groups, because that's how I view it should be utilized most effectively. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of is the feedback from everybody else. And you talked about, hey, I want some of these Bible study techniques and all that sort of stuff. So we've decided at the end of each episode, I will be sharing one Bible study technique or a technique for leading small groups. And we'll probably switch it back and forth until I run out of ideas. But what I had for this week, and that you can practice this week while you do Marks 1 and 2. And this is, so I'm a teacher by trade. Um, so this was something I kind of intuitively knew, but I read it in the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. So that was the first time I had it like written out and explained. When you read something, so as we're reading this week, pretend in your mind that you have to teach a class over those 2 chapters of Mark and all the other readings. And then as you're reading, you'll find that you're retaining information more. You're building the ideas all together and you're kind of framing everything into this like lesson. And then you'll find, wow, I didn't blank off and like, how you jump a page. You're like, what did I read? That doesn't happen. Things start sticking. You're very focused and in tuned. And when I learned that trick, reading things have been a lot better. So that's your trick for this week. Read it like you're going to have to teach somebody about what you're reading.
That's a good tip.
Cool.
You're not going to make me teach next week, are
Well, I don't know what the
you?
format is next week. We get to make it up. Actually, I kind of know what the format is. And it's how I lead my small groups, which is I sit down, I look at everybody, and I look at my paper and I go, we'll start with people's questions this week. And that's just how I kind of do it. So I'll just pick a spot and ask you what you wrote down. So
Sounds good.
cool. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining this first episode of the Castelline Ministries podcast. And I hope you stick out with us for this series. I highly encourage you. If you got a small group and you can do this within that, awesome. If you're doing that, sweet. I'd love to know how this goes for you guys. I know not everybody has the ability to join small groups. So if you're doing this on your own, reach out to us. We're going to form a community of people, send in questions. And I'm really excited for this experience.
Yeah, me too.
Sweet. All righty. Bye, everybody. Thank you all so much for listening to that first episode of the Castelline Ministries podcast. This is the first podcasting I've ever done, which means I forgot at the end to ask you guys to support or be a part of this community. This is a nonprofit that I've started, and I want everything to be free for churches to use as a resource, as well as individuals. And in order to do that, long term, I want to build ministry partners, people who are willing to give to this ministry, so that way we can hire on professionals, translators. Eventually, this could be a new job for me. It's not something immediate, but we're just looking for ways to grow and to expand these great resources out to others, and having ministry partners like you guys is a way that would be super helpful. So check our website for all the different ways that we have for giving. We have all sorts of different ways for that, and I would just really appreciate any and all of you. But this will always be free for everybody, so don't feel pressured. It's just for those that want to be a part of this ministry. So thank you.